We gaan door met de show and it's biophotonics time now. Our next speaker will guide you through this as he's a professor of biophotonics. His story is about butterflies and colors, at least that's where his research started when he began investigating structural colors at the University of Exeter School of Physics in 1998. His research diversified since then, and so is his talk today about the photonics of a much broader range of animals and plants. A talk about researching colors in nature. Here's Pete Vukusic. Sorry, Pete.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm sitting at the front there, and when Marco finished his fantastic talk, I gave him a hearty handshake and congratulated him on one of the best talks I've ever heard, despite the situation that he dealt with admirably. I stand here now wondering how I can possibly follow him, and all I have is the aroma of celery on my hand, where I shook his hand. So that will stay with me as we progress through the talk. I'd like to start at the beginning, maybe, and the beginning is my family. So here is daughter number 1, and son number 1, and daughter number 2, and son number 2, and wife number 1. Well, she's still my wife, and I hope we will stay married. I'm sure we will for as long as she will have me. Life as I knew it following number 2 kind of changed. Saturday evenings were no longer filled with restaurants or friends' dinner at friends. Now it is this, sleep early. I don't have a lot of energy to do very much, other than on a Saturday evening to wander up and down shopping aisles like this. So that is the job of a good dad and a good husband to do what's needed. And so I'm wandering up and down aisles like this, like many of you, and you will be bombarded, like I am, with color messages, color images. In the UK and globally too, we have companies like Unilever and Procter & Gamble making detergent, making toothpaste, making jam, making everything. And they will color the packaging in such a way that you will notice it. Were we wandering down similar aisles, insects, we would be shopping on a Saturday evening in this sort of environment. We would be bombarded by color messages. And each color, the evolved color signal, would have a function, namely, come and pollinate me, I'm full of nectar, or words to that effect in butterfly speak. So, let's try to understand color, and let's understand color from the technological perspective. There are 3 ways of producing color that I'm not going to talk about other than on this slide. And they are interesting and scientifically valid, and scientists for centuries have tried to understand how color is produced. So we have flowers. Let's pick a peony here. So this would have 2, 3, as I look inside, principal pigments. And pigmentation is the first and most common color mechanism for producing mechanism that we have here on Earth. Some chlorophyll for the green leaves, some flavonoids and pterins for the various reds and purples, and all of that is pretty well understood. In addition to regular pigmentation, and you will notice, although you're too polite to remark on it, that my hair is very gray. That happened after child number 2. No more melanin. My roots are no longer producing the pigment melanin. If I go and try to get a suntan, my skin, melanocytes on the skin, will produce more melanin as protection against the UV. So pigmentation. Pigmentation is the way of producing color relatively easily. It's a chemical pathway. Another pathway is fluorescence and bioluminescence. And those things are valid, but are far less common. And so I won't really talk about them here and now, other than to say they are also chemical pathways. Now, another pathway that I am here to talk about is structural color. Rather than pigmentary color, it's structural color. And I think we'll need some sound on this movie. We all recognize this glorious male peacock here. So I work at a university, and many of our staff meetings sound just like this. Lots of alpha professors trying to make room and fluff their academic feathers against other alpha professors. So the purpose of this the brightest colors that we see, and, oh, sorry. And these sorts of colors are indeed the brightest, some of the brightest that exist on Earth, far brighter than reds from the peony's petal. How are those produced? What is the mechanism by which we get the brightest colors, the most functionally significant color communication on Earth? Well, that was the question that one of our forefathers of optics asked 400 years ago, and that was Isaac Newton. He did lots of stuff. He did calculus, he did gravitation, he did optics. And he understood optics at a fine level, despite not having access to very much instrumentation. So here is a copy of a book that I borrowed from the library permanently. I still have it. And then finally, 2 years ago, it was the university library that sent me a letter saying, we believe you've lost that book. Pay us £10 and all will be done. All will be forgotten. And indeed, that's how the deal was done. Inside, we see the date. And let me just, we saw a Roman date earlier in one of the talks. This is a test for many of the students in the lectures that I give. Can you just decode what date that is, that edition? Shouts from the audience are welcome. Excellent, 1730, there you go. So this is a very significant book. Now you'll notice that the forewords by Albert Einstein, he didn't live back then, of course. He was a bit more recent. However, the edition dates back to that time. And let's have a quick look inside, shall we? Here is page 252, and I've circulated this. Newton himself was interested in how peacock feather colors are produced. And he says that the finely colored feathers of some birds, particularly those of peacocks, do in the very same part of the feather appear several colors and several positions of the eye. And what that refers to is the word iridescence. The color we see in these peacocks and some birds and beetles and fish is a set of iridescent colors. In one position, it's one color. In another position, it will be another color. And that's only possible via structural color mechanisms. So let's maybe have a little look. What he proposed, rather than saying, oh yeah, it's all pigmentation, it's this pigment or that pigment, he said that it derives from the thinness of the transparent parts of the feathers. Thin plates was his mechanism. Amazing. So, we're into some jargon now, and I apologize for this jargon. It's a photonic crystal is where we're beginning. The word crystal infers order, and the word photonic absolutely implies light. So a photonic crystal is something which is ordered and which can control and manipulate light, and thereby color. So we can design a series of plates, a series of layers. On a cold morning when you're starting your car, if you have a car, there may be a puddle and you may have dropped some car oil or car petrol and it will spread out and you'll see a beautiful spectrum. That is a single thin film plate of petrol that's creating the color that we see. And it comes about because light waves reflect from the different surfaces and constructively interfere with each other. They constructively reinforce one color in reflection, and if you change the thickness, we get another color reflected. So if we know that with respect to engineering these systems, we can say, right, let's make a set of thick plates with a certain periodicity. Let's make a set of thinner plates, and we can manipulate what color is reflected. Now, right there, it's a series of layers. Imagine a big pack of pages of A4 paper, and we stack them on the page. Well, the order that we refer to with respect to this word crystal is down into the stack. That's where the repetition is. Here's a model of it up here. That's just one-dimensional. We can make it in two-dimensional or three-dimensional. Now, here's the special thing. If we were to make a three-dimensional repeating material, it will manipulate light in all three directions. In other words, it or nature or the butterfly or we as a technologist can have control over the flow of color and light completely. And that's a very, very powerful thing. So, one of the variables, one of the scientific variables that we've got here is angle. That symbol is theta, and it refers to the angle of incidence. As that changes, according to Newton's book and the peacocks, the color of the feathers will change. The color of the system change. The color of this car should change. So, Perhaps we'll turn the sound down a little bit, please. Shout out, please, what color, really loud, what color do you think the car is here? Red, keep going. I'm not hearing the right answer yet. Pink, not hearing the right answer yet. What color is the car? Yeah, it's not such an easy answer. In fact, it's a tricky question. Yellow, green. It's an iridescent color. That's the correct answer. At one angle, it's green. At another angle, it's magenta or violet or whatever color you classify that as. I love this movie. I'm just going to toggle back. Because we're in this wonderful country, I'm going to go back to the start and say, ignore the car. Just have a look at the trees. Just look how symmetrically spaced they are. That's what I love in particular about visiting Holland. So, we're going to look now at this beautiful butterfly. And to do that, we will take a look for a second at this specimen that we have here. Oh, and we may need the other camera. There we are. So, at the right angle, we can see some incredibly intense blue reflection coming from this real butterfly. It's not some sort of make-believe one that was made in a shop. Thank you. And these morpho butterflies are indigenous to South and Central America, and they are wonderful examples of the complexity associated with generating and controlling this sort of light and color. So, let's take a look at where the color comes from. Remember, it's not a pigmentary color. If anything, there is brown and black pigment present in that butterfly, but no blue whatsoever. If we use an electron microscope to zoom into this small region, we see the scales that cover the wings. Zoom in still further, we see some fine structure along the surface. Imagine a row of hedges running all the way down here. Well, we're looking kind of down on those hedges. That, in a sense, is some structure. You'll notice that we have a scale bar here. That's 3 micrometers. That's 3/1000ths of a millimeter. So these things are small and have to be small to manipulate the light. But here's the big thing. If you look carefully, we see some even finer structure there. And it's that structure we need to discern more clearly to be able to understand how light interacts with this system to produce such brilliant blue. So to do that, we take a salami slicer. It's not actually a salami slicer, it's an ultra microtome, and we're able to section, cut off very, very thin sections. And when we cut off those sections, we see this. This is the essence. This is the secret, if you like, of how the morpho butterfly produces its blue. The thickness of these layers, the space between them, and the material from which the layers are made are perfectly evolved to reflect blue color very, very brightly. The number of layers here, the more layers you have, the greater the brightness. So this is a wonder, if you like, of evolutionary processes. And it's brought about because of the benefit, the advantage it gives to these males signaling to each other over long distances. Now, how might we use that? That's wonderful. That's amazing, biologically speaking. Technologically, some grant funding institutions like to say, well, we want an impact. We want a product. In many ways, that's sad, but one has to work within the envelope. Where might we take this? All of this is open to the air. That's air. This is material. So that's air, that's air, that's air. Imagine if I just threw some vapor onto it, exposed it to some alcohol or water vapor or explosives vapor. You might see where I'm going with this. This was funded by the US Air Force and by DARPA, and we were able to use, working with GE Global, a real wing. We exposed the real wing structure to some of these vapors, and we were able to discern changes in reflectance associated with the condensation of these very different vapors to the surface. Not only was it sensitive, but it was selective too. A real wing. Clearly, in a prototype or in a device, real wings would not be used, but these things are now being mimicked around the world to provide the template, the biotemplate for use in such devices. Not so much a device, more a product line. Conventional cosmetics have always been pigment-based, and as a result of that have required depending on the material, certain testing, and testing doesn't go down well with everyone. However, L'Oreal recently worked with some of the bio-inspired ideas that were coming out of the research in this area, and they produced Photonic Cosmetics. These series of cosmetics marketed it under their Lancôme brand, don't use pigments per se in the same way conventional cosmetics do, but they use the photonic, the interference of light, to give a dramatic brightness and a very special color aesthetic. So let's go on to the next system. That was an insect, animal. Now let's have a look at a plant. We were interested in this plant partly because of some friends of ours at Kew. Here is a slide of a collected sample from Kew. Well, you might not be able to see. I can't even see when that was collected, so let's blow it up. And it is about 1816. Now, this is all dry, and cellulose dries out, and sometimes the properties, especially the optical properties, change dramatically if they're not pigment-based. Here's another collection. This is dated down to 1838. And again, the lights and the color contrast, you might not be able to discern the color, but there is genuine bright, bright color. This sort of color, it's intensely bright. And these things are, haven't died out, but they're still around. And here is one freshly fallen from a tree. It was the challenge we set ourselves was, what's at the source? What's the origin of this plant color, this seed color? Well, an optical microscope will reveal this. Lots of long, thin cells, and each cell seems to be the seat of the color. One can see below that there are blue ones perhaps going lengthways in a different direction to the surface ones, but when we have an electron microscope view of this, and by the way, we need to use electron microscopy because only with it can you get the required magnification, which will reveal the details. And so here it is. This distance here is 1/10 of a millimeter. So the structures are very small. Now, can you see what we're beginning to see here? There's the long cylindrical cells, and I call it cylindrical because that's what we see there. Let's now look at a close-up of this region here, and we can start to see, does it ring in a bell? The repeating layers that we have and which we need to produce the brightest colors. So one can talk endlessly about that. It's all published. But the next question was, how do we make use of that design? That's a curious design. Imagine if that design was some sort of thread, and the thread itself would be colored. Well, that's what we set about doing. Matthias Koller was the lead person on this. He's currently at MIT. And when he did this, he was at Harvard, and we had a grant together. And Matthias came up with a genuinely innovative way of producing these things. So how do you get a Swiss roll that's very, very long? That's repeating layers. How about if we think about unrolling the Swiss roll? What do we start with? Well, you start with a flat rectangular, let's say, double layer. Okay, how do we make a double layer? Well, one standard way of doing it is to use spin deposition. So we have that gray plate spins around at a controllable RPM. And when you drop a bit of fluid in the middle, centrifugal forces will spread it out. And if it dries in an appropriate time, that depends on the concentration and the solute, it will form a given thickness that you can control and you can measure. So let's make one layer out of a material called PDMS, just a common cheap material, cook it off, and let's put a second layer out of polystyrene, PSPI. Great, we can cook that off, and now we have our bilayer. But then, how do we get access to the bilayer? Well, the really neat thing to do next is to put it in a water bath, let the bilayer float off, and then we'll get a very narrow core optical fiber as a cooking pin, or I've forgotten the phrase, a cooking pin, and you just roll it along the middle. And there it is. We roll up, and the more you roll, the more layers that you get. These materials are tremendously cheap, but I've kept the surprise to last. The surprise is that they are stretchy. So, what happens to a block of wood or a block of metal or a block of rubber when I stretch it? If it has a particular property, with a positive Poisson's ratio. Then as we stretch it that way, it's got to conserve volume, it'll get narrower that way. So if I make this system here, and let's have a look at one of the things that we've made. Here is a rolled up layer, and there is a kind of a magnified region showing all of the repeated rolls, and here is where the inspiration for it came. Imagine we take that thread, when it's quite long, well, I say quite long, that long, and believe me, that took some doing. So imagine we pull it, it's going to get narrower, and all of these layers will get narrower themselves. Now, think back to that schematic slide just before the car. What happens if we reduce the layer thickness? The color changes. So let's have a look at this. Here are 3 different color threads that Matthias made, designed to be different starting colors. And as soon as he stretches them, the thickness of the layers will change. Keep your eye on one of them. And the patents for this currently center around microsurgery. It's a strain sensor, an optical strain sensor, so that when a clinician is doing surgery remotely, he or she will have an ability to sense the tension under which the suture is placed. So, let's move on to this. This is a white screen. My time is very nearly up, and I'm very nearly finished. We're on the home stretch. Whiteness, blackness, whiteness. 2 big kind of extremes, as you would say, of color appearance. We came across, just looking on the internet, I came across a white beetle that I'll show you in a second, and it's triggered the question, what creates really efficient whiteness? So the screen is quite white. Under regular illumination, this would appear very white paint. I'd like to have white teeth. I'd like to have white eyeballs, but with a lack of sleep these days, that doesn't happen so much. When I was young, I looked at this character and thought, yes, Gandalf. He is the sole, he is the boss. He is the controller of order in a disordered Middle-earth full of greasy, oily orcs and quarks and all of those things. So what makes this white? What makes his beard and his eyebrows white? Is that an ordered thing? Well, we looked at this beetle. It's a Cyphocylus beetle that has evolved whiteness because it normally lives in and around plate fungus, so it's a camouflage effect. And when we looked at the scales, it's got some cousins that aren't quite so white, but when we looked at the scales, which are really thin and really white, this is what we found. We found that inside isn't an ordered, regular system, as we'd associate with a crystal, but it's a completely chaotic, completely disordered system, and it's this disorder which scatters, which reflects all wavelengths in all directions simultaneously, providing an ultra-efficient whiteness and brightness. And it's the thickness of this, there's a cross-section through it, that we can compare against the minerals, let's say, are used normally in paper, in coating paper. So a sheet of paper, we haven't got one, a sheet of paper that might be used to print this is a kind of base cellulose that's pulped and bleached, and then on top and bottom there is like a butter knife on toast spreads a layer of minerals. And those minerals are calcium carbonate that's ground or precipitated, or a clay, which is a sulfate. Look at how much better in its brightness 5 microns of beetle is compared to 5 microns of one of the other more regular minerals. So this beetle is providing a way to produce much brighter whiteness in whatever system you'd like, for a lower thickness and a lower cost. Anything's possible. We look to nature to try to understand the ways in which we might benefit from the systems that have taken 500 million years to evolve. And what better system than this one? Thanks to my good friend at Woods Hole, Roger Hanlon, for providing this. Have a look in and around its eye. By following nature, we should be able to manipulate pattern and brightness and color and texture to do whatever we would like to do with it. And there finishes my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pete. Brilliant, brilliant whiteness. That's something we keep in the back of mind. I saw one of your kids had red hair. Was that because of your photonics, or? Ah. Okay.